And there was another bill earlier. I came to California about the same age as most of the audience, 1970, and ready to practice internal medicine with the pure scientific training that I had back east. And I had just finished 2 years in the service in Savannah, Georgia, not in Vietnam, so I had a really good, cushy place. I joined these two internists, and we got along fairly well. And somewhere about the second or third year, my senior partner had a patient with severe chronic lung disease who developed a pulmonary infection, pneumonia, and she was treated in the ICU with antibiotics, respirator, bronchodilators. A lot of that stuff was pretty much in the infancy compared to where we are today. And they made rounds every day, my senior partner and the pulmonologist who was working with him. And on weekends or when he was off, I would fill in. And one day on rounds, they were talking about the fact that the pneumonia had cleared, she was doing well, except she was still in coma and she was ventilator dependent. There are now units and wards where people can be managed on long-term ventilator care, but there was nothing like that in the early 70s. And so the pulmonologist said, "Bert, I think it's time to let her go in peace. She's ventilator dependent. We will never, ever get her off the ventilator." And my senior partner said, "I want to continue to try." And so he got a crash course in 15 minutes on how to use the ventilators, which he knew nothing about. And thanks to the ICU nurses and the respiratory therapists, the patient managed to continue to get well very slowly, and a few weeks later she left the hospital. And she was in her 50s, so there was a lot of life to salvage. And somewhere about 6 months later, one of my office staff called and said, "Bert wants to see you in examining room 4. So I went in, and there was his patient sitting on the exam table. And he said, "Alexa, please tell Dr. Glatt what you told me." And they told me not to use the real name, so everyone is going to be Alexa tonight. So Alexa said, "Thank you." And Bert says, "Well, why did you say thank you?" She said, "Thank you for not listening to the other doctor who wanted to disconnect me from the ventilator." And I was blown away. I just had a hard time standing still, and I was almost on the verge of tears because nothing in my scientific background taught me that someone who is in coma, and in those days, you determined coma by taking a safety pin and jabbing it as hard as you can into the Achilles tendon. That was it. You didn't draw blood, but you poked real hard, and she was in coma in that period of time. And there was nothing to explain it. So that began, and Bert was amazed too, because he's also the pure scientist, and I'm the pure scientist. There has to be something beyond that. There's a spirit or a soul. A few years back, they developed this whole model of the biopsychosocial model of medicine, and people are practicing integrative medicine, looking at all different aspects. And I imagine the younger generation is much more in it than the older generation. That led me into exploring other things with other patients. And one day, another Alexa came into my office. She was in her late 60s or 70s. She had spent 20 years in a state mental hospital. Can you imagine that? It's severely depressed. And I think it was under Reagan, they started closing all the state mental hospitals and sending these people out to the community so new psychiatric residents could take care of them. And Esther lived in a senior residence around the corner from my office, and she would come in regularly. And one day she came in desperate and frantic, and she said, "I want to go back to Agnew State Mental Hospital." I said, "I don't think so." She said, "Oh, I can't handle it. It's too stressful." And I don't know what came over me, because sometimes I think outside the box. And I took her by her hands, and I took her off the examining table, and I put my arms around her, and I held her in a hug. And it seemed like a long time. It was probably 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And I stood back from Esther, and she had a smile across her face. And no antidepressants ever work that fast. So I made a plan with Esther, and she would come into our office 4 days a week when I was there, and I would hug her in the business office area, which had glass. We had glass, clear glass for the waiting room. And I would hold her, and she would smile, and then she would leave. I said, there's no co-payments. We won't bill Medicare. And she did terrific. And then everyone in the waiting room, I shouldn't say everyone, many people in the waiting room said, why is he hugging that lady? And the staff would say, go ask him. And so began the beginning of hugging as a means of showing care and a love and concern for patients. Nowadays, it's a little tricky because of what's happening in society. So probably in the last 4 or 5 years, I usually ask for permission for new patients. And men are the best huggers of all. And they're usually there with their wives. So my wife sometimes gets a little nervous about who am I hugging, but it gave me a whole new perspective of the humanistic aspect of internal medicine. And I began talking about those experiences, and other people knew about it, and other members of the professional staff. And my partner was chief of staff at Peninsula Hospital in Burlingame for a few years, and he also spread the word. One day I got a call from a urologist who said, Bill, I want you to see my patient, Alexa. Alexa has advanced renal cell cancer that has spread to the brain, and she's in intractable pain and intractable vomiting. She's had surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, nothing is working, and the medicines make her obtunded. I said, what can I do? He says, I just know that you're different. Go see her. So I would do my internal medicine visit. I'd check our heart and our lungs and check the calves for clots and check the vital signs. But I'd also hold her hand and sit by the bedside and we'd talk. And it was really clear she was from a dysfunctional family and wasn't willing to do anything about it. And I said, you know, Alexa, there's not much I can do. The doctors have done everything they can for you to stop getting headaches and for you to stop getting vomiting. You have to tap into your own healing powers, whatever they may be. I don't know how to tell you to do that. There's no manual. How do you heal yourself? And she knew she was dying of cancer. It's not like she was going to cure herself. And I was coming close to Christmas vacation, and I went in one day and I said, I'm getting ready to go on vacation with my wife and children. We're going skiing in Colorado, and I'll be gone for 12 days. As a little aside, I grew up in New Jersey, where the F word is the same as saying good morning, you know. That was the way it was. And so I went in to say goodbye to Alexa. I said, I'm going to be on vacation for 12 days, and I'll see you when I come back. Unless you die while I'm gone. And I said, holy shit, fuck. And I just turned around. You cannot take the words back. They come out, boom, you're finished. And I actually banged my head against the wall. And usually I would stop at the nurse's station and tell them what's going on. This time I just sulked off the floor. I went home, I told my wife, she thought I was crazy. And we went on vacation. There's no computers, there's no way to log on. I wasn't going to call the hospital. I thought I was going to be subject to disciplinary action if they found out what I said. And I come back 12 days later, I walk up onto the 4th floor nurse's station, and like this, 3 nurses and a social worker surround me. And growing up in New Jersey, you know not to answer a question directly. What did you say to that lady? What did you say? I said, why do you ask? They said, as soon as you left, she asked them to discontinue the IV. She stopped her pain medicine. She stopped her injections for nausea and vomiting. And she left either 1 or 2 days later, went home for the Christmas holidays with her family. And I still didn't tell them what I said because, I just was afraid of, that's not in my style. So I called her at home and had her come into the office. This was about probably 3 weeks after she left the hospital. She came in and we discussed the things that I felt she had to do, particularly in the family dynamics. She knew she was dying. She was willing to die rather than to try to make changes in that family dynamic system. And a few days after my office visit, she went back in the hospital and died in about 48 hours. So what did I learn? These are 3 different stories, and yet to me there's a binding common thread, and that's treating your patient, treating the person as opposed to treating the illness that the person has, and being one with them and letting them share their life, and you share your life with them. And I think it makes a wonderful, wonderful situation. And thank you very much for listening.